Chairman. Mr. McLerran, welcome to the committee. I hope you find this a judicious use of your time. Good. In your exchange with Chairman Smith, you said you agreed the Inspector General that there could have been conduct that might have occurred which needs some type of adjustment. You recall that exchange?
It's over an hour ago now.
Right, well, sure, but something along those lines. And on page 5 of your testimony, you write, and I'm quoting, EPA's 44-year history of judicious use of its Section 404Z authority has and continues to ensure predictability and certainty for the business community. So judiciousness, as it were, from your own words, that's a good thing, right? We all seek to be more judicious. You might be interested, I looked up judicious, and the example they use from dictionary.com is using or showing judgment as to action or practical expediency, prudent. And then it says judicious use of one's money. And I would submit that we're here to protect taxpayers' dollars. In your exchange with the gentleman from Virginia, Congressman Beyer, he asked you if you had communicated with the mine owners about their permit, but you had not been accused of collusion. You remember that exchange?
I do.
Okay. But you didn't offer to strengthen their process or their permit as Mr. North did to the opponents of the mine. Is that fair? You did not offer to strengthen their permit process.
So in many conversations with the Pebble Partnership, we talked about how the scientific information that we pulled together might benefit them as well as our decisions.
Okay, well, if you did, kudos to you. That would be a judicious use of taxpayer money, I would offer. And you also said with the exchange with Mr. Moulinar that there were multiple drafts of the options papers. Ultimately, you were the one that decided to go forward. Was it based on those options papers, your decision?
So, you know, as I understand it now, there were many options papers, you know, exchanged back and forth between staff before I saw options papers.
But you made the decision to go forward based on those options papers. That's what you just said with the Moulinar. There were many option papers, but ultimately you were the one that decided to move forward.
So there was more than options papers that went into the decision-making on this.
But did you see those option papers? Or did you make a decision without seeing those options papers?
So I saw some final options papers at points at which I was briefed or when the administrator was briefed, but
you had already made the decision before you saw those options papers?
No.
Oh, so you did see the options papers before you made the decision to move forward?
I have not seen all of the options papers that were exchanged amongst staff that I am now aware might have existed.
So is it customary for you to make those kinds of decisions without the benefit of all of those options papers, all that knowledge?
Yes, because what happens, you know, in our processes is we have a lot of back and forth between staff before they present options to leaders.
Mr. McLerran, in 2015, Kim Strassel at the Wall Street Journal asked you about your recollection of one of those documents prepared which laid out those options. And you stated that neither you nor other decision makers at the EPA had ever seen that document. Did you state that to her?
I did.
Do you stand by that today?
I do.
But you just testified you saw some of those option papers.
So what I saw was final option papers that were documents at the point that I was prepared to make decisions.
So someone picked and chose what option papers they wanted you to see?
Well, again, our process often involves staff working back and forth together.
Who the reports you would have carried those options papers you and said, Director McLerran, you need to look at these option papers. Who would have done that?
So Rick Parkin typically, you know, would have had those discussions. But again, the options papers weren't the only consideration.
Would you be surprised to learn, Administrator McLerran, I know you're having to read fine print here, that we have documents that shows not only were you briefed on those option papers, but you actually requested edits to those documents.
So again, you know, there were points at which I was presented options papers, but not all of the options papers that were exchanged back and forth. And while I don't recall editing options papers, that's something.
North testified, we've got his testimony, that he doesn't recall writing the options paper, yet you requested edits to it. Does it seem judicious for taxpayer money that nobody in the EPA seems to understand who wrote the options paper, doesn't recall the document? You didn't admit until, I think, just now you made edits on it. with regard to the Pebble mine, and nobody even knows who authored those documents. Is that, I mean, are we hiding behind an anonymous author of that document?
I would not call that a fair characterization.
You would not, would you call that a judicious use of taxpayer money?
You're asking me to make a conclusion based on your character.
Well, the American public, you know, we want fair and open process. We want to know who's responsible and who wrote the documents and how you came to that conclusion without collusion, as Mr. Byer of Virginia asked you about in communicating with the owners of the mine. So the American people expect fair and open process. Well, let me just close by saying this. You keep saying that the Office of Inspector General looked at these things, but the OIG doesn't hire and fire employees in your department. Is that right?
That's correct.
You alone have that ability?
That's correct.
Okay. So I'll go back to what I said earlier about judicious. Now, with your exchange with Chairman Smith, you said there must have been some impropriety. We heard testimony that they looked at 3 emails, but you still stand by your statements. You're not willing to investigate and see if there were any more proprieties in the department that you manage, not the OIG, and that's a judicious use of taxpayer resources?
So just one correction, they looked at over 8,000 emails. And again, you know, Mr. North left the agency before the Inspector General.
So I'm corrected, it's 3 custodians' emails. Well,
Gentleman's time.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. McLerran.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. With that